Our starting point on plot, if you can remember back that far, was the idea that action verbs created a temporal sequence in the story world, move time forward in the reader's simulation. So we were always going to end up here, dealing with time. In the next two lessons, we'll take a close look at two of the ways fiction writers have to wrestle with the portrayal of time in their story worlds. This lesson is about the more conspicuous of these two considerations, the order of the events unfolding in the story. Not surprisingly, most stories run in one direction with regard to time. After all, it's how we experience the world, past, present, future. And, as we'll see, it's usually easier for both author and reader to manage a story that unfolds along a far more familiar, linear timeline. Sometimes, though, for narrative effect, storytellers will deviate from a traditional linear path. One familiar example of this is a climactic hook, when a storyteller begins at the climax, presenting a reader a sneak peek at the maximum suspense level awaiting them. A good bet to pique a reader's interest. Then the narrator dials the story back to the beginning, showing their audience how it all got started and the eventual stakes. You know where the story's going, and you're willing to wait to get there. But things are now all out of order, and we'll need to talk about it. Let's get started. The breaking of linear timelines is one of the oldest distinctions in modern narrative theory, first expounded upon by the Russian formalists of the late 19th century. You don't need to know about them. I only mention them because unfortunately they left us the terminology nerdy literary folks use to talk about this aspect of stories. Fabula and sujet. We're not going to use them. Let's do this instead. Suppose I were to tell a story of the real world, at least as it pertains to humans. Let's say for the sake of this illustration that our world is a fictional story world. Tell me at times it doesn't seem like it is. Let's follow this story world's timeline from the moment people tell their first stories at campfires and start building tools and pooling their resources in tribes. Now walk the timeline forward as civilization begins to develop in Mesopotamia, Jericho, and Egypt, and spreads out to Europe and Asia. We end up in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, all the way forward to our time. Let's call this the true timeline. It's the story of all things unfolding in their actual sequence in the story world, 1 minute to the next, following the natural progression of space-time. Now let's presume I'm a novelist. Good presumption, by the way. I get the crazy idea that the Greek gods were actual living beings, immortal space travelers with superpowers who took human form and lived amongst us, eating our bread and drinking our wine. Nowadays, these immortals have become powerful bankers, running the Fed and the European Bank, something like that. They're feuding behind the scenes. It's the reason for all our economic strife, you see. As the storyteller, I decide that the best way to tell this story is to show how their current feud began, all the way back in Greece. I give you a scene with the major players scowling at each other as Athens burns in the background. Hades vows revenge. Then I fast forward to modern times, presenting my reader with the current lay of the land. How Zeus is the head of the IMF, Hades is pulling strings now at the EU, and Poseidon is the real brains behind China's financial rise to prominence over the last 2 decades. Whatever. The key to how the whole thing plays out, mind you, are the other gods. Hera, Athena, Demeter, Dionysus. And you, dear reader, need to know how each one got allied with their current faction. For that, I'm going to need to give you a scene back in ancient Egypt where Dionysus comes rolling up the Nile on a riverboat, packed to the gills with wine barrels, and parties all night long with Poseidon. Then I'm going to jump off to India, where Zeus and Hera are introduced by Vishnu at an ashram, and incestuous sparks immediately fly when they stumble upon a spare copy of the Kama Sutra. I continue to bounce around like this until the stage is set for our modern-day showdown. Then it's on. I've just shuffled the cards of time, so to speak, in order to offer you a complete, albeit complex and ridiculous story. The best terminology I can come up with to describe this is a story sequence. It's the order of scenes as presented by the narrator once the cards have been shuffled. Maybe the true timeline would tell a more complete story, but it would be a different story, and it would take forever and totally drag in the first 100 pages while you were learning all about who was friends with whom and why. As a narrator, I decide that the suspense will be better sustained by interspersing those alliance-building scenes in the past with scenes that ramp up the tension in the present-day showdown. By the time the audience has met all the allies in the past, The climax of the present-day showdown is already set up. We rejoin the true timeline for the climactic battle of the immortal space-traveling bankers. Yes! Are you as excited for it as I am? I mean, I could toss in a few dragon bots to spice things up. This thing needs a little spicing up, I'd say. But it illustrates the point. Sometimes the best way to maintain suspense over the course of a messy narrative, or to introduce a character who comes into the story part way, is to use a story sequence that doesn't follow the true timeline. For a minor character's backstory, or a piece of history that just doesn't fit with a linear telling, sometimes a story sequence is the way to go. We'll look at a few types of stories where this works quite well, far more elegantly than my Greek god bankers, no doubt. In order to do this, you're going to need to jump around in time, obviously, and we're going to talk about this. It's worth having our terminology straight. Fortunately, there's good terminology in common parlance: flash back and flash forward. Let's use them. The final important piece of terminology represents the time skipped. In literary circles, you may hear the term ellipsis, but I'd love to keep it simpler than that. Let's call it a gap. Flashbacks, flash forwards, and gaps. Beautiful. Okay, I've talked about a couple reasons a writer might do these things: to sustain suspense and tell backstory over a sweeping narrative with tons of players. What are some other reasons for shuffling the deck? Theme. I can think of a pair of films that deal with a thematic connection between multiple protagonists that shuffle the deck to show similarities between the characters. Julie and Julia and The Godfather Part 2. Certainly the better known of these two films is the second installment of the Godfather saga. For our purposes, looking at films is actually faster, more self-evident, and more helpful. In any case, the film, starring Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, follows the lives of both Corleone godfathers, Michael, during the present day of the story world, and Vito, through flashbacks in the past. The thematic parallel tells the story of Vito growing up and rising to prominence in the New York underworld, while Michael's story, which begins with him already in charge of the family Vito had built, focuses on Michael solidifying his power, expanding to a new area, and turning his local crime family into a national empire. The viewer gets to follow the two men's similar paths to prominence, from poverty through danger, transgression, and violence, ultimately to power and wealth. Highly magnetic. Sure beats Rowe's latest brainchild, Olympian bankers versus dragon bots. The other film I mentioned, Julie and Julia, focuses on the lives of two characters: a modern-day New Yorker who writes a popular blog about cooking every recipe in Julia Child's cookbook, and Julia Child herself as she's learning to cook in France. The film is actually based on two books that were published around the same time. The filmmakers chose to jump between the present and the past in order to closely show parallels between the two women and to make one coherent story. No doubt it would have been strange and poorly received to make a movie in which the first half follows the life of Julia Child exclusively, only to completely abandon the legendary Ms. Child to take up the story of a little-known modern-day blogger for the second half. Together, though, these two parts make a coherent, thematic whole. Not quite the cinematic masterpiece like the Godfather sequel, but still a well-received film that effectively bounces between timelines to excellent thematic effect. Surely there are other examples that will come to your mind. The Hours by Michael Cunningham just popped into mine. And that's great if you're starting to think this way. You're getting it. Breaking up timelines is a great way to show parallel themes in separate individual lives or time periods. Object or place. Another example of a successful use of a nonlinear story sequence is The Red Violin, a story that is anchored around a fictional violin from the 1600s. The present-day storyline in the story world takes place in 1997 Montreal, where the famous red violin has come up for auction. The film bounces back to the violin's creation, following the object as it passes hands from prodigies to gypsies to musicians rescuing instruments amid China's Cultural Revolution. Each one of the segments serves to heighten the viewer's connection to the object. Its tumultuous history and survival through the ages raises the level of suspense when the film's climax, the present-day auction, finally occurs. Similarly, one could anchor a story around a place with a deep history, like an old village in Europe, a temple in India, or a neighborhood in Boston. While the plot of each segment is likely to be mostly self-contained, the connection to the object or place affords the writer the opportunity to tie these plot units together into a larger coherent work with a central focus. Hidden Past. Another film that comes to mind is Clint Eastwood's The Bridges of Madison County, an adaptation of a Robert James Waller novella. There are two timelines, a present day where the adult children of a farming family return to their homestead in Iowa to bury their recently deceased mother. The film then flashes back to the main plot of the story, a secret affair their mother had with a photographer when they were children. In the present, the disbelieving son and daughter go through the letters exchanged between their mother and her secret lover in order to piece together the history of this hidden chapter of their mother's past. It ends up deeply affecting them in their present-day lives. A hidden past narrative like this one can often be used to dramatize the contrast between the way we think about the world as we believe it to be versus the way it really is. Likewise, a single scene of a hidden past can be used to reveal information that has been concealed from the reader or audience for dramatic effect, a twist at the ending that brings a revelation into focus. A helpful hint that I can offer as an author of at least 3 novels that unfold across multiple timelines and locations: if you're going to write a story with multiple timelines, outline those timelines meticulously, especially if they intersect. This is a place where the Kim approach can get you into serious trouble. In order to make a coherent story blending multiple overlapping plots, the timelines must fit together. You need to consider a time difference when a character in Chicago calls a character in Sydney. And if your characters are going to go somewhere, you need to know how long it would take them to get there on a plane. I've spent hours standing over a 10-foot strip of paper with a line on it and a deck of index cards in hand struggling to fit multiple timelines together. When actions over multiple intersecting timelines begin to affect one another, things get complex very fast. In cases like this, plotting is the only way to go, and index cards are your friend. This is another one of those places where the complexity can be theoretically infinite. Mixing timelines can be a tricky business. Choosing what information to reveal to your reader at which point in the story will inevitably shape their impression of your simulation in a massive way. You may have a wonderful, complete picture of your story world across multiple time periods and places. The trick is getting that picture from your head into theirs using the tools you have, and that tool only operates one way: one word at a time. Left to right, across the page, top to bottom. That's part of the challenge. It's good to have a handle on why you're shuffling the deck in the first place. It should be to a purpose. And if you find yourself struggling to pull the story together, always consider the larger picture, the overarching plot, the global, introduced plot element, plus constraints, plus resolution. It's the proper framework to ground all your subplots against.